Okay, here we are again. Uh, I'm going to do something completely different with Mecanim. Showed you Mecanim with a humanoid character that we ran around the world. I showed you Mecanim with a couple of AIs that followed Fleet and did various things. But Mecanim can be used for a lot of other stuff. Let me get a share screen going here. So today we'll talk about the mechanism of anything. Mecanim, as we've seen, is good for controlling animations of humanoids, but we can also use this to control very simple animations of practically every aspect of almost any object. For instance, we might want to have a sliding door that when a character approaches the door, automatically slides out of the way, kind of a Star Trek thing. And we might wish to turn on and off various lights, maybe change their colors as something approaches. And all of this is easy to do with Mecanim. We saw animations where we did these kind of things, but these were mechanical animations where we set keyframes. And what we're going to do here is allow Mecanim to control the transition between two different states. For the case of the door, open and closed, and for the case of the lights, on or off, or changing their colors. So with the door here, I'm going to create 3 panels, 2 for the wall and 1 for the door, line them up so that they're the way I want them to be. And I'm going to put the middle one in an empty game object. I'll call it a door container. You remember when we talked about doing animations that it was important to have the animations relative to a container so that you could put the container anywhere you wanted it to be, and the animation would be relative to that container. And so I'm going to do this with the door as well. Here's my little setup. I've got my 2 green walls and my yellow door, and I'm going to animate the yellow door so that it slides out of the way when the character comes in. So I'll select the door container. I'm going to do this relative to the door. So that's going to be my the object on which I animate. I'm not going to animate the door container. I'm going to leave it alone. Instead, I'm going to drill down into the various properties of my door container, down into the door, and I'm going to animate that. I'm going to create 2 animations, each with only a single keyframe at time 0. I'm going to delete the other one, the other default one that comes up at time 1, and I'll make an animation that has the door in its closed position, and I'll make an animation that has the door in its open position. So let's do that. Here's the door container. I'll switch to my animation. Whoops, I'll switch to my animation view. So I'll start with the door container. I'll create an animation. I'll call it a door closed animation. You can save it wherever you want. We can move it around later. And I'm going to add a property to it. I'm going to drill down into the door, into its transform, and I'm going to get its position. Now here's that second keyframe that I'm going to delete. So I'll delete that one. So we only have a single keyframe. And I can look at the position. My door is at 0, 1.50. And since this is the closed door and my door is already closed, I'm done with this. So let's make another animation, create a new clip. This one I'll call a door open. And again, I'm going to drill down into the door, to the transform, to its position, and I'll delete that second frame, delete that second frame, delete the key. And now I want to move its X position over so that it's at minus 1.5. I can play this animation to see if it worked. Yeah, it worked. The door moved. And so now I'm done with that animation. Now, in the process of making that, the door container automatically got an animator component added to it. It automatically built a controller, a door container that is over here. And let me rearrange this so that I can get it all on screen. Oops, just want one. Put that there, 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 and there, and press the A key and it zooms in. Now, as it turned out, because I made the A door closed first, it's the default state. But had I not done that and I wanted to change the default state, I can just change it by clicking and highlighting. But I want this one to be the default state. I've made these two states. I have the any-state green, two animation state boxes labeled door closed and door open. I've got a default state that's the door closed. Now I need to add the parameter that's going to control this and the transitions to and from the two states that are going to be based on the value of that open parameter. The transition from closed to open should be when the trigger open is true. The transition from open to close should be when the trigger open is false. So let's do that. I'll add a parameter, a Boolean parameter. I'll call it open. I'll leave its state by default false. And now I'll make a transition from door closed, make a transition, and I'll make a transition back. And the transition from door closed to door open will be when the open is true. I've already done this, but I dragged the door into this little window so that I can now see the transition. So here I would be able to adjust the timing of things and how long the blend is between the different cases as it transitions from door closed to door open. Transition from door open to door closed is just that the case is false. So I should now be able to watch my door open and close. Now there's one other thing, of course, I have to do. I need to put a trigger on it. I need to, somewhere here, I need to add a collider to my scene. I can do it with the door. I can add a box collider to it. Let me get the scene view of my door. I want my door over here. Well, let me add a game object, an empty game object that I'll put at 0, 0, 0. And I'll add a sphere collider to it, and I'll give it a radius of 1 and I need to put it kind of right where the door is here. Let me make it a little bigger. Let me make it 1.5. So now I have a sphere collider that is a trigger. And this is what I'm going to add my script to that I'll show you in a second. This is going to be the trigger that opens and closes the door. So the script that we need is fairly simple. I'll call it door opener. It's got the usual using stuff up at the top. In the awake, I'm going to catch a cached copy of the animator. This is not necessary since we're using the angle bracket version, but I include it just for the sake of it. So that sphere collider that is trigger, the sphere collider that is trigger over here, this is when something enters that collider. The collider other, if it's the player, I'm going to set the Boolean open to be true. That'll open the door. And when I exit that trigger, if the thing that exits the trigger is the player, I'm going to set that Boolean to be false. I don't have a character in this scene. Let me see if I've got a character here. Oops. So here's a third-person controller. No, I don't want a third. I want a, yeah, it's Ethan. That means I need a camera. Let me use the dude. Let me just go to a scene that's completed here rather than futz around with making this. I have a scene here with Ethan. I'll save that scene for us. I have a scene here with Ethan. That's my cat. Thank you. Hold on, let me let the cat out. I'll be right back. Don't go away. Sorry about that. So this is basically the same setup with the same scripts. I've got the door container. It's got a door, walls. I'll talk about these lights in a minute. But so my character can approach the door. I can approach the door. As I enter that trigger, the door opens and I can move on through and I can run back and forth through the door and everything works exactly as I would want it to. So all pretty cool. So you saw those lights there. In that case, I had some red lights that I wanted to turn green as the door opened. Other lights I might turn on and off. So to do this, we need to create a light. Those red lights are, I'm calling them door lights. And I added an illuminated sphere to them so that they'd show up. They're illuminated spheres. They're casting light out onto these things. They've got a point light in them. They have an emitting material, a red glow material that that is emitting. It's emitting. And I believe I've used real-time lighting here so that all of this takes place in real time. So again, the exact same idea, making transitions from red light to green light by adjusting the parameters of those lights. animations for the lights. Here's the red light animation. The red light animation, all I've done with that single frame is that my material color is all red. And for the green light, it's exactly the same, except the red color is 0 and the green color is 1. So again, these two animations created just to have a single state with a controller for the lights that is going to transition back and forth between those two different states, exactly the same way using the open parameter, just like the door. I'll add to my activate door and lights script that now has both lights and the door. The animator is for the door. I've got this public array of light animators that I can drop into it. So the door container has an array of lights. I've got door light 1 and door light 2. And those are animators, not the game object door lights, but the animators on the lights. And again, I just dropped the lights into those slots to locate them. In my triggers now, I've got the open on the door animator that opens the door. And I go through each of the light in lights, that array of lights, each of the light in lights, and I set its animator open to be true. And when I exit, I close the door and I turn the lights back to their default state. And that's how the lights turn red and green as we walk through our door. And the lights stay green as long as I'm inside the trigger. When I move outside the trigger, the lights go back to being red. And pretty cool. Okay, one more thing that we might do. And now this controls any of the lights that I put in that animator, in that array of lights and animators. I can have the lights turn on and off when the player is nearby, sort of a motion sensor kind of light. Again, two animations, one for when the light is off. I'd set its intensity to be 0. Another for when the light is on. And for this one, I bothered to make a looping, flickering intensity that changes. And a controller with appropriate states on and off, and transition triggered by an appropriate parameter, in this case, activate. A collider for the triggers that we walk into. And our script is basically the same as the door script. We have the animator for this light that we're going to activate. We get a cache copy of that, and on trigger enter, if it's the player, we set activate to true. When we exit, if it's the player, we set activate to false. And I have a scene here with a bunch of lights. I've got now lights on both sides of the door, 4 different lights that are being triggered as the door opens and shuts. I've got kind of a static light out here. As I walk back through the door, this flickering light turns on that we can see here with the floor. As I move a little further, it triggers another light that has a bigger cookie on it. And if I walk even further, I'll eventually get to the point light that comes on and flickers around my character. So all very cool motion sensor lights actually not motion sensor, but proximity sensor lights that will come on when my character is near them. This could certainly be used in some kind of cave game where you're wandering through a dark dungeon. You didn't want to light the whole thing, but just light the areas where the character is in proximity to it. So that's all pretty cool. We can do this with any character that's named to be a player. We can animate any property of any of our objects, position with the doors, rotation if we wanted to, material properties, color, light intensity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of fun. So I'm going to stop now, end this recording. I'll see you all in class. Bye.